I come before you today as a proud One Piece fan to say that we were right, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, Loki did have a doozer of a backstory. I mean, it was a given. It was a new popular character that Oda had introduced. We might as well have all got out of our books tragic backstories of Oda's doing. We should have chucked Loki's name in there as soon as we saw him. Honestly, from what we've just found out in the most recent chapter of One Piece, 1153, his backstory might be top 3, top 5 worst, and we haven't even finished exploring it yet. But as I just mentioned, this is all information from the most recent chapter of One Piece. So guys, if you don't want to be spoiled, click off now. And you might be asking me, Jack, why are you doing a video on Loki's past? The flashback hasn't even ended. And knowing Oda, we could have 2 more chapters of his flashback, or we could have 22 more chapters. That's a little bit hyperbolic on my part. I'm not sure if you've all noticed, at least it's what I felt. Oda is definitely ramping up the pace of the story, which makes sense because we're in the final saga. He's probably got more information to dish out in this final saga than he has in the rest of the story. If you think about what we just haven't seen yet in nearly 30 years of serialization. So it needs to be a quicker pace than, say, back in Dressrosa or Alabasta or Water 7 or any of those other arcs where we were taking our time a little bit more. So if I was hypothesizing, I wouldn't say this flashback would go for more than another 3 chapters. And what did we find out in this chapter? Obviously, this video is not a full chapter review, but we found out more information on Loki's father and Haruding's father, Harold. Oda did really good at exploring who he was. Quick, cliff notes. He was an egotistical brat at, when he was the equivalent of when he was about 40, I think equivalent human age would be about 15. He was bigger than all the other giants. He was stronger than all the other giants, and he was Prince of Elbaph. So he had a big chip on his shoulder, and no one could really stop him. He would have been stronger than a lot of the adults on Elbaph, and if people were stronger than him, he had the authority as a prince, as nobility, to get his way with anything he wanted, essentially. But hope is not all lost, because he meets a woman, I should say a giant, and her name is Ida, I believe you would pronounce it, or Ida. I-D-A. I'm going to go with Ida for this. They have, like I said, this is a Cliff Notes, Jack, quickly, don't get sidetracked. They have a nice romance, she changes him, and they have Haruding, but the people of Elbaph don't want a foreign queen, so Harold has to marry someone else. And this woman is... how should I say this in a delicate way? She's a bitch. We'll get into that in a little bit. This video specifically is going to be more about her, actually, and Loki, rather than Harold and Ida. Not because what we found out wasn't interesting. I'll probably do all that in a separate video. Harold had a lot of character development in wanting to, very, very similar to Kazuki Oden, wanting to kind of open up the borders, in a sense, for Elbaph and teach the people of Elbaph new ways of living, new kind of thought processes on how they view the world. So he definitely seemed to be a visionary in the making, and a lot of that had to do with Ida, the woman that his true love. Of course, he didn't marry her, he married someone else, but as we'll come to see, she's the one that he always loved. But you're probably thinking, Jack, you've made some fancy title or thumbnail about gods and, gods influencing Loki. Haven't decided what I'm going to call it yet. It's going to be something along those lines, because the meat and potatoes of this video that I wanted to talk about today is the amount of influences that Loki's character has with the gods of mythology. And this isn't the first time Oda has showed he has taken influence from other myths in the past into his present day characters in One Piece. But I've never seen him go so haywire with it and put in so many different influences to the character of Loki. Now, this could all just be headcanon. He might not be thinking about this whatsoever. I could just be connecting dots where there aren't any dots. So let me know down in the comments. Did you guys think a similar thought process of me? Do you think I have what I'm saying makes a little bit of sense? Am I completely off the ball with it, off the mark with it? But let's just go and list all of the different influences that just I've been able to spot from Loki's character with, quite frankly, the limited information that we have of him so far. So the most obvious one, let's just get it out of the way. His name's Loki. And that's not just, he doesn't just share the name Loki with the Asgardian god. He shares the trickster nature. He shares the people being untrustworthy to him. He shares the cunningness of Loki, the deceit of Loki, like how he tries to manipulate Luffy and stuff like that. He shares more than just the name with Loki. And like the Norse myths of the real Loki, this one, even more so with Oda's version of Loki, it doesn't seem like that's just his nature. The story of the frog and the scorpion, I'll jump to the end of the story. Scorpion pierces and kills the frog as they're traveling over the water, and the frog's like, why have you just done that? Now we're both gonna die. And the scorpion just replies with, it's my nature. This doesn't necessarily appear to just be Loki's nature. It seems to be a lot of the nurturing versus completely blanked on the saying. We'll get around that. The environment that you're raised in versus the love that you're given. Nurture versus nature. There we go. Got it in the end. And Loki's environment definitely seemed to be the catalyst of why he's turned into who he is. And even now, I wouldn't classify him as a bad person. Just a little bit rough around the edges, I guess you could say. So we have Loki, the Norse god, as one influence. Tick. Now, the next one we have is actually Thor, in my opinion. And I went into this when I did a Loki's video. Go and give that one a watch. I think Oda is mixing Thor and Loki together, the Norse versions, obviously, to get this current day Loki in One Piece. Now, this is less concrete than other inspirations that Oda has shown us for Loki. But he has Thor's brashness, Thor's, honestly, what's the right word here? As much of a trickster as he is, he's very kind of honest with his emotions. He's you get what you see with him is what you get. He wears his emotions on his sleeve a little bit. Sorry for the cut there, guys. I am first or second day of getting sick, and I've just gone off into a coughing fit. I do apologize if my throat's sounding a little bit my voice is sounding a little bit nasally. Just try and bear with it for me. But Loki wears his emotions on his sleeves. We see this with the God's Knights, where he just tells them to piss off. Like he could have handled that more diplomatically, in the sense of, trying to play them, trying to get them to release him, and then he can betray them. But he didn't do any of that. He was very just adamant of, yeah, no, you guys are assholes, and I'm not going to sacrifice my pride and my ethics, my own code, to go along with you people. So guess what? Piss off. So he shares that with the character of Thor in Norse mythology. He also shares Thor's battle powers. He seems to be a very straightforward fighter, and that's something that Thor possesses as well. He also has his hammer Ragni, which wherever he strikes, a bolt of lightning comes down. Once again, hammer, lightning, Norse mythology, we get Thor. Thor and Loki there as one. Now we start getting into some new influences that are starting to pop up from this most recent chapter. The first and most obvious one I want to go for is the story of Hephaestus. Now, Hephaestus is the Greek god of the forge, the god of fire, god of craftsmanship, and he is the biological son of Zeus and Hera, the king and queen of Olympus in Greek mythology. That's kind of important because Zeus and like a lot of the gods, especially the Olympian gods, a lot of them are either a sibling of Zeus or a child of Zeus. But there aren't too many gods and goddesses that are a biological child of both Hera and Zeus. Because we know Zeus is a skirt chaser. He's had numerous other kids from demigods to other gods, always incurring Hera's wrath. The three main gods that they've had together is Hephaestus, Ares, and Nike, or Nike. I believe Nike's the pronunciation. Don't know why I'm going with Nike there. They're the three main ones, and Ares and Hephaestus are they're the cream of the crop there because they're both Olympians. But the story of it goes is that Hephaestus is born, and he's born with either like a lame leg, or he's born with a disability, or ugly and warped features, which are very, honestly, all of the above. From if you put if you put the stories together, there, almost lost it. But if you put all those stories together, you get kind of just this ugly abomination in Hera's mind. Of course, this is just a baby when he's born. Hera sees him, is disgusted that this could have come from her, because keep in mind that these are gods and goddesses. They're supposed to be created perfect. So she takes Hephaestus and she throws him off Mount Olympus. Hephaestus goes crashing down the mountain, doing more damage to his already broken body that he got from birth. And he's ended up being rescued by some of the naiads, and they kind of nurse him back to health. And that's where he learns his craft of craftsmanship. It's important to know some stories have it Zeus kicking him off Olympus due to an argument that the two had. But once again, this is mythology, and there's many different interpretations of it all. That is the main one, though, what happened with Hera. Now, obviously we can see some similarities here, because in the chapter, Loki's mother, her name is Estrid. I don't think I went into that in the intro. Her name is Estrid, and she is a whack job, essentially. To not be so flippant with it, she seems to be someone who practices the One Piece's version of Feng Shi, I believe, Shen Fi, something. It's a Chinese mystical art where, I don't know, to be fair, I don't know too much about it. I probably should have researched it a little bit more. But it's the placement of objects and the use of natural herbs and stuff like that to better give your life more fortune and give yourselves the best increase in whatever you're trying to do, essentially. Say you wanted to have more health, you'd be putting things in certain positions to get all the energies floating around in the world, to channel those energies into what you wanted for the purpose of how you've displayed the objects. That's what it is. Feng Shi, I believe it is. Correct me if I'm wrong there in the comments. But that's essentially what it is in layman's terms. In these terms, she's a crazy broad, essentially. And she comes in and she just takes over the castle. She's like, oh yeah, I'll have all the treasure. This is how we're gonna do it. Get rid of that mirror. That's placed wrong. Do you want to kill the king? Are you guys crazy? And she has all these different interpretations. It's the wind and the earth energies that she's trying to channel. And she kind of just comes in as like some authoritarian boss and just commands everyone to do as she pleases. She's very, very egotistical. In terms of her looks, I'll probably, chuck a photo up on the screen, but She's kind of a carbon copy of Nami, Robin, any other beautiful female character that Oda draws. I just make a note of that because Ida, Harold's, true love, she actually looks quite different. The best way I would describe her is she looks very homely and it kind of like the girl next door type of just homely, whatever vibes. You know what I'm saying? Freckles everywhere. She's got like those Usopp lips. She's not stereotypically drawn to be very beautiful, but that's who Harold falls in love with, of course. And in terms of personalities, she is the winner chicken dinner compared to this crazy woman that we get introduced to here. She gifts Harold the eight-legged steed horse. That's from Norse mythology as well. It's what Odin rides. I completely forget its name. I actually believe, from memory, I believe it's something I really struggle to pronounce anyway, so it's probably for the best. But that's the horse of fortune and stuff that we get told it's Loki's fault that dies in a year's time after Loki's born. Of course, that's nonsense. What else do we know about her? That's pretty much it, other than the big crux of her character. Because you might be thinking, like, Jack, she might have some weird beliefs, but you're being a bit hard on her. I'm not being hard enough. She gives birth to Loki, and Loki comes out, he's, cooing and crying, and she sees him. And it's kind of like that, we'll get to that in a sec. But she sees him and she screams in terror. What is this? What is this abomination? This isn't my child. Get rid of it now. And she's saying that because Loki is born with slitted eyes and the ancient giant horns coming from his head. And he looks demonic, I guess you could say. He looks like an ancient giant. And Estrid can't believe that this has come from her, and she demands everyone get rid of the baby. Now, this has probably happened because we know, or at least we do know, that Harold, Loki's father, has ancient blood in his veins because he has horns too. And Estrid's family is said to have hailed from the ancient giant. So what I think is happening is with the lineage factor, Loki has gotten all of like the DNA from the ancient giant sides from both bloodlines come together, and that's what's influenced his appearance so much. One important thing I wanted to note though is that the nursemaids that are in the room and the servants with Estrid, they don't seem too worried about Loki's appearance. They kind of be like, Lady Estrid, my queen, calm down, like he's just a baby, it's gonna be okay. And they're trying to, change Estrid's mind of like, don't react this way, he's just a baby, like go and see him type of thing. Which I find very interesting. And what backs this up is that for all of the citizens' hate on Loki, they never comment on his appearance. They're never like, oh, that abomination, have you seen him? He looks like a demon and all this type of stuff. Like, they never really go into that. We might find out at a later date that was existing. Maybe only a select few members. But we never see any comments like that. Harudin and the other new giant warrior pirates never comment on that either. They just comment on Loki's trickery and penchant for chaos. So I do like that it seems like the people of Elbaph aren't as superstitious as Estrid is. But she sees him, grabs him, and like the story of Hephaestus, throws him off the sun realm into the underworld. And everyone's looking at her like shocked at the audacity of what she has just done there. And she's like, good riddance. I'm never ever bearing a child ever again. And she's walking off. And then we see quite possibly one of probably the craziest feat in One Piece to this date. Because of course it's all a matter of, perspective and scale here. We see baby Loki climbing up Yggdrasil, the Atom Tree. He's climbing up it as a newborn baby. I think he even decapitated a bear to get up there. So he's climbing up, and Esther just looks horrified, like, oh my god, I thought I'd gotten rid of the freak, and it's coming back up. And that's where the chapter ends, and we don't learn any more on what happens with Loki's backstory here. We know that he's blamed for Esther's death a year later, so it's obviously confirmed that she dies. Whether or not he had some influence on that, whether or not it was just a coincidence, we're not sure yet. But the main reason I retell this is to show why Oda has now referenced Hephaestus. So that's the story of Hephaestus, Loki, and Thor. So we've got 3 gods so far. Now I'm also going to put in a 4th one here. It's not so much a god, but a principle regarding another god. And that is that it is apparently prophesied that Loki will kill his father. Now, this is a trope that we see in mythology and history all throughout the ages, in different texts, in different cultures. If we stick with, we'll stick with Greek for the main one, and there's the story of, before we get into the godly version of it, there's of course the story of Oedipus. He was prophesied to kill his father and wed his mother, which he ended up going and doing. Essentially, the way he murdered his father was through a mistake. He didn't know that it was his father, and it was an accident. And then he didn't know that the woman was his mother, and that's what fate took him down the path of. And it actually brings me to one of my favorite sayings of all time. Hopefully I get this one right the first time compared to my nature and nurture debacle in the beginning of the video. But you often find that the path you take to, you often find your path, you often find your destiny, on the path you take to avoid it. I really love that saying. Another, there's a lot of good saying about paths and stuff like that. Also another one, the path to hell is often paved on good intentions. 2 really good lines there. And so obviously there's the Oedipus example, but I'm not going with that. That's a little bit creepy for Oda to reference that. Even though they do reference, that's like an actual psychology teaching scenario. They do use concepts of that when they teach students and stuff like that. But the main one I wanted to go into, and a less known one probably, is the story of Metis, the goddess Metis, a Greek goddess. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of her before, but Metis was actually Zeus's first wife. He didn't marry Hera first, like most people believe. He married a goddess called Metis. And she got pregnant, and she was going to bear him a child. And the fates came down and spoke to Zeus that if this child is born and it is a boy, he will overthrow and kill his father. In this case, Zeus. Now, Zeus is extra paranoid about this because what did Zeus do to his own father? He cut him into 1,000 pieces with the help of his siblings and buried him in Tartarus. And Zeus's father, Tartarus, also did that to his father, Uranus. Uranus in One Piece, any connection there? That's a stretch. But this is why Zeus is, if we're trying to get into his mindscape here, is paranoid about what the fates are telling him because he himself has done this. So what he does, does he talk to Metis? Does he chuck on a condom? Does he, not be an ass? No, he decides to eat his wife. Yeah, you heard me right. He decides to eat her. And this, ironically, is how Athena is born. So, after a while, Zeus is complaining about pains, and he takes the top of his head off, and Athena is born from his mind, from his brain. If I'm remembering my mythology right, correct me if I'm not. This is all just off the cuff here. Yeah, if memory serves, that was kind of a version of Metis that was born from Zeus eating her. It created some disturbances type of thing, and Athena was born from that. I think it was Dionysus or Hermes, one of the two. Zeus, to protect the child, sewed that god into his thigh to protect them from Hera, if I'm remembering correctly. So gods being in Zeus's body is not unusual, and like we were saying, his father ate his siblings, so it's all in line for Greek myth. But there's another reference, so that makes four of something, a concept that Oda has given Loki about overthrowing his father, essentially. And I feel like we all know that it's probably not as simple as that, that there's probably more to it. But it's references that I'm spotting. Now, what were some of the other ones that I noticed with the story of Loki? Not a story of Loki, and it's not something that Oda would have been referencing, but did anyone else notice that the story of Harold and Ida was very reminiscent to the story of Dracula and... Oh, what was the woman's name in Castlevania? I've completely blanked on it, but his wife in Castlevania. She's a very ahead of her times, strong, independent woman that changes Dracula from this murderous hermit, if you will. Oh, sorry, someone who has absolutely no faith in humanity. She changes him. And it's through her influence that he becomes a better person. That is very... That's literally word for word what happens with Harold and Ida. So I thought that was really cute getting to see that as well. So that is four gods and one anime side story that Oda has just given us for this most recent chapter. The last one, I will admit, is more nebulous, but hear me out here. Loki's story is a little bit reminiscent to the Norse, I don't know what you want to call her, Norse princess from history slash myth called Aslag. Aslag, one of the two. And if you're thinking to me, Jack, is he about to just describe what happened in the Vikings show? I am a little bit, very, very little. Because that show is quite... They take a lot of liberties, but it's also quite truthful of at least the characters involved being from stories from history. And Loki's story is quite reminiscent to this story, of the story of Aslag. I'm probably going to go back and forth between those two pronunciations as well. Because, to be honest, she's a bit of a slag. But if you haven't watched Vikings, it's a great show. Probably top 5, at least top 10 TV series of all time. And in it, Ragnar has a first wife called Lagertha, a shield maiden and a Viking. Now, shenanigans happen and he needs to take a second wife. And Lagertha doesn't want anything to do with that, so she bolts. But the main part we want to get about is Aslag. She becomes in and she's the second wife, and she's very cunning and she's very superstitious, and she's said to have powers. In the real history of it all, when she escaped the people that were trying to murder her when she was a child, the foster parents that took her in ended up giving her a name. It was like, forget what the name was, but the name meant crow, and that's what she went by. But she was very into the mystical arts, let's say. Kind of like a certain Estrad in terms of her wind and earth, feng shui type of spirituality, if you want to call it that. Aslag had similar traits. Back at this time, and at least in the Viking show with what they show, is that some people thought it was actual magic, not just a pseudoscience type of thing. And she came in and she kind of took Ragnar's attention away from everything and gave him sons. So it's very reminiscent to what's happening now with Estra. This beautiful princess comes into the land, meets the king for the first time, takes his fancy, even though Harold isn't so much fancied by her, he's more under obligation, but takes his attention and they have a child together while she changes the customs of what is going on in his establishment. Now, one of the other reasons why, because you might be thinking, Jack, it's a little bit flimsy what you're saying here, you're going on a while, and you could be right. But one of the other reasons why I think that is because of what is the biggest description, the biggest takeaway from what Loki looks like physically, as a baby and as an adult. What's the first thing you look at? Other than his, massive fuck off size as a giant. For me, it's the bandage eyes as he's an adult and the slit eyes when he's a baby. And what this could be referencing is the Viking. There was a Viking warrior, not just in the show Vikings, but in history. Now, how truthful the accounts of this person is very much debatable because of how long ago it happened. But he was called Sigurd Snake in the Eye. He was born with like a serpent dragonoid slit for an eye. Now, the way they play this off in history is that Aslag is supposed to be the child or grandchild, I'm blanking on my facts there, of the legendary hero Sigurd or Siegfried. He's a legendary hero because he was supposed to be the one who killed the evil dragon Fafnir. And Aslag's mother or grandmother was Behilda, who was a famous woman Viking warrior. So she had a very strong lineage, kind of like what we see with Loki, with the ancient giant lineage. But the baby Loki's eyes that we see, they're slitted like dragons. That could be very reminiscent to Sigurd, Snake in the Eye. So I thought that was just a touch that Oda might be going for. Could be nothing whatsoever. You could also throw in a little bit of the story of Ivar the Boneless, or Ivar the Deformed, I think he's sometimes referred to as. Because he was born with deformities and stuff like that, a little bit like Hephaestus. I don't know this part of the story in history, so I'm just going off the actual Viking show here. But Aslag loved Ivar still. She didn't hate him for his deformities, so the concept of it being more Hera and Hephaestus is much more likely. But those are the main kind of references that I've just taken away from one chapter. Like, so many things were clicking that I've seen before in, let's just say, fiction. And I wonder if Oda is doing this deliberately or if it's just a coincidence. Because to be fair, you could probably stretch more references to Loki's character. One other thing I do need to mention, another reference that he has for the Norse Loki is the fact that he's chained to a tree for a bunch of years. Loki had something similar where he had a serpent's poison dripping into his eye, and in that he had his wife that would go and catch all the poison and get rid of it to give Loki some relief. And who does our Loki in the One Piece anime have? He has Mosa, who is kind of bringing him relief. Not relief from the physical nature of it, but the relief mentally of someone to talk to. And who is Mosa? Could she very potentially be Ida, Hirudine's mother? That seems like the most likely outcome so far, but once again, it could be too on the nose, and Oda might... The logistics of how that's happening could be a little bit up in the air, so we'll just have to wait and see where Oda goes with that. But that's pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about in today's video. Like I said, I'll mention Harold in another one. Not immediately, but maybe in a few days. But let me know down in the comments if you guys have recognized any traits from other gods that you have seen with Loki. Also, he's goddamn calling himself the sun god. It's just God, 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 God. He's favored, kissed by the gods. I'm going to have to come up with some really cool title or thumbnail for this. I honestly don't know how I'm going to go about doing it. since unfortunately there's very limited images of Loki. But that's a me problem. Thank you guys for sticking along with me all this time. That is, if you have. It's been mythology is one of my favorite things to talk about. It's literally anime, mythology, movies, TV shows, and wrestling, surprisingly. They're the main things. And having said that, I probably just butchered all those accounts of mythology. I'm sure I'm going to get people much more knowledgeable than me in the comments. Jack, you're an idiot. This didn't happen. Blah 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 blah. And please enlighten me and inform me. I really do love to just learn about it all. See where if I'm not flat, even if I'm not flat out wrong, the different interpretations of stories I would love to see. So, peeps, have a lovely night. It's getting late for us here, 2 o'clock in the morning, so it's bedtime. Handling it better though than I did in the last video where I felt like I was going to collapse. I've been Jack Cypher. Have a great night, ladies and gentlemen. Cypher out.